We are live. Take it away, Allie.
This is Literary Roadhouse, one story once a week. This is Allie.
I'm Gerald.
And I'm Anais. And today we're joined by Allie Hoff-Kosick, a full-time freelance writer whose work has been published in outlets like Marie Claire, Cosmopolitan, Brit & Co., Medium, The Kitchen, Real Simple, and more. She's also the host of the SSR podcast, on which each week she invites a guest to revisit a book from their middle or high school days. You can learn more about Allie at alliehoffkosick.com or her podcast website, ssrpodcast.com. Links are provided in the show notes. Welcome, Allie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. So we had met each other on Instagram before the holidays, and we're like, let's just mix things. I feel like bookish podcasts really need to support each other because it's so niche.
I agree. I've met so many wonderful people in this community, and it's been such like a great way to reawaken my love for reading. It's been a few years of freelancing and being on my own, and I worked in book publishing before that, so I was surrounded by all of these amazing book people, and being back in the Bookstagram world has brought me back to that very special place. So it's great to meet you. It's great to be here, and always happy to connect with other readers and book lovers.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. Oh, Bookstagram has opened my eyes. I started doing that just a few months ago, and now all of a sudden I'm like framing mugs behind, behind novels, which I would like. This is fun. It's actually a lot of fun. I didn't think it would be as much fun as it is.
Yeah, but you're right. I'm like, does this book look good? Do I look cute when I'm reading it? Like, do I have other like things that I can put next to my book? It's fun, but it is a little bit stressful sometimes.
Yeah, I walk around my house and I find myself saying, "Ooh, that's a nice texture. Ooh, I bet that'll good looking bright light."
How's my light?
Yeah,
I've not heard the word Bookstagram before. There you go.
That's the big hashtag, Bookstagram.
Is it really?
You know what's funny? So there's all kinds of different people on Bookstagram, like in terms of like what kinds of accounts, and there's some that are like very personal. Here's what I'm reading, and there's some that are like influencers, so like they get stuff from publishing stuff. The influencer ones, sometimes like they're amazing because they're like awakened, like great reviews, books I never would have heard of otherwise. But I'm like, how do they have this many fake flowers, beads, lace, so much stuff? And I'm wondering, I don't know if they get all that stuff or if it like comes with like the book for the framing. But I'm always just like, I need a budget just to go to a hobby store to get lace for my next Bookstagram photo.
Yeah, I need a production designer, and I need like an intern to set up all of my book shots. I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, but like I said, there's Bookstagram people that are doing more like the podcast side or personal stuff, and then there's the influencers, which I feel like they really drive things in a very helpful way, just like introducing new stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely a hard level to crack, though. If you want to be a Bookstagram influencer, you've really got to commit.
No, I don't. I do not.
Too much work for me.
Yeah. So, but moving back to short stories.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be here forever.
Sorry. Today we are reading Omakase by Weike Wang. Our two unnamed... Oh, if you've not read the story yet, pause the podcast, go off and read it, and come back, because there are spoilers. Our two unnamed main characters go to a small sushi restaurant for a meal out. The writer tells the story of the evening with the backstory inserts and thoughts of the female. She is of Chinese extraction. He is white Western. They've only been living together for 3 months. There is clearly racial tension in the air. But is the woman imagining it, or is the man too stupid to notice?
Very good question.
Good question, yes.
Yes. Okay. So, Allie, with guests, we always like to ask, so why did you pick this story?
So I had mentioned this to you when we first started talking about having me on the show, but my confession is that it has been a while since I read a short story. I think for me, like the idea of a short story kind of harkens back to like my high school English reading textbook. And I was always such a novel reader. And I used to get very frustrated in high school when I was assigned those short stories. So it's been a while, I think, since I really dug into a short story. And first of all, I'm so happy that I had a chance to read this because it made me realize short fiction is like such a wonderful genre. And I actually got myself a subscription to The New Yorker because of this, because I enjoyed it so much. So it took me a little while to figure out what short story I wanted to read, just because it had been a while since I'd read one. And what drew me to it was the title, Omakase. Omakase is something that my husband and I like to do on special occasions. We're actually planning to do one for Valentine's Day this year. It's definitely a treat to go and eat sushi and sort of be treated by the chef to anything that they think is fitting for this like delicious menu of theirs. So I was very drawn to the title. And then when I read the summary, which was exploring this relationship between the man and the woman, who clearly are like in a transitional phase in their partnership, I was very interested in that as well, because those are the kind of novels that I like to read as well. I really love character and relationship driven stories and books. So I thought, combination of Omakase, which I love, and this sort of like style of writing that I enjoy, it seems like the perfect fit for me.
Yeah. So Gerald, did you enjoy the story overall?
Yes, although I don't. Regular listeners will know I have a very. I get impatient with male characters who are unkind to female characters, so I tend to take an instant dislike to these people. But it was I liked the start. I liked the way it was structured. I liked the way that the author handled it and delivered the story. And I enjoyed it both times I read it. I really enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that you don't like stories where men are unkind to women, because I didn't see him necessarily as unkind. And we'll get into that question of like, is he just kind of dumb? Like, I didn't see him as unkind necessarily, just, he doesn't have to think about race. How convenient. He hasn't had a life of like dissecting every little thing, Wow, must be nice.
Yeah, or being a woman and sort of being hyper aware of the judgments of everybody around you, which is definitely sort of how I've experienced life and how I think so many women are conditioned to experience life. But I agree. I don't know that he was unkind. I think he was just sort of in his own little world. And it made me laugh because I live in New York and I felt like, oh, I met this guy. My girlfriends have met this guy who just didn't necessarily have any ill will, but was just like so ignorant to the true nature of the world and to people's actual experiences. So I had to laugh just thinking like, I know my friends have been on dates like this.
Yeah. And I will say that it's a very short story, but in a very short span of time, the author did like bait me. Like as soon as he's like, "Oh, you want to watch Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon?" I was like, "Wait a minute! Like, is this one of those?" And then no, it's not. Or is it? Or is it kind of? Is it both? But she would bait me with those things. Like he knew way more about Tang Dynasty pottery, and I was like, "Wait, hold on. Is he going to be one of those cinephiles? Is he going to be one of those like Asian women fetishists?" But no, actually.
Yeah. Well, and I love that his entry point into her culture was pottery. Like, I don't know that I've ever read a story in which one of the characters was a potter or a pottery teacher. And I did like that it was the man who was the pottery teacher, because I feel like so often in books and stories, the sort of more artistic personality is the woman. So I thought that was kind of cool. And it was an interesting entry point that like it was through pottery that he sort of was experiencing Asian culture. So as annoying as he was, I appreciated that he had kind of this like interesting perspective on like a part of Asian culture that probably most of us don't know very much about. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I Googled it and I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. I like that. I like that. He sort of had this connection to the chef at the sushi restaurant, but in actual fact, the chef didn't know and couldn't care less. It's just a part. It's just a dish to him. But he was waxing lyrical about the style of it.
That part reminded me actually a lot of my dad. So New Year's Day, we had like a family plus friends plus neighbors big outing to a sushi restaurant that's really like renowned for their omakase. So I did that fairly recently, and so my parents kind of go here like semi-regularly, so like they know the chef sort of, but we're not sitting by the bar. We're like across this massive restaurant, and my dad still every 2 seconds sees the waitress like, so the chef name's Jason, like, "Oh, let Jason know that was amazing," really loud, so people around could hear that he knows Jason.
Oh dear.
Kind of reminded me of my dad a little bit. I was like, yeah, I know that guy.
Yeah, I'm not going to name any names, but we definitely have some people like that in my extended family, getting very buddy with the chef and like trying to get to know everybody in the room, no matter where you are. And again, like there's no ill will, but I think you can definitely step into dicey territory, as you said, like when there's race involved and sort of like bigger issues that maybe the person just isn't really thinking quite enough about.
Yeah. And frankly, when people are like that, a lot of times it makes them more endearing. It does actually break down walls. It does sometimes make it even more interesting. It's just once in a while you misstep and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that, Yeah. High risk, high reward. So,
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting that her parents loved him so much. Like, I think that made my feelings about him so much more complicated. She was so nervous to introduce her parents to her first ever white boyfriend. It had been a long time since she'd brought anybody home, period. And I was nervous for her. I was like, oh no, he's going to mess it up. He's going to say something embarrassing. But the fact that they were like falling all over themselves because they thought he was so fantastic definitely made me feel like, oh, maybe there is more potential with this guy. I felt more complicated about the whole thing. Did you feel that way?
yeah, I definitely did, Gerald.
Yeah, I did wonder that because there was something in the text about Chinese people with white partners and something about your sort of status in society because you have a white partner or something like that. I wished. Yeah, I don't know where it is now. I can't find it. But it was that sort of thing that maybe they were a bit enamored by him because he was white and he was American.
So I'm glad you brought that up, Gerald, because I think it's a bit of both. On some level, they just like this guy who seems, by all accounts, laid back, sociable. Like I said, the high risk, high reward side. Like he can go and talk to anyone, right? On the other hand, there was that comment that for a Chinese woman to be with a white man is it's climbing the social ladder. And that's one thing about the story is, the story is mostly focused on this couple, but there's all these other external factors coming in, other people who are also seeing them a certain way, other people who are making comments about their relationship. And what struck me is what they tell her that she's lucky is both gender and racial. It's gendered because at 36, a woman, like basically you were going to be a spinster, but now you're not.
Tick, tick, tick.
Tick, tick, tick. Yeah, exactly. Like, good for you. Get that baby in. But then on the other side of it was the racial side of, well, you're a Chinese woman with a white man. That's an upgrade. And it's like, but if you take a step back, if you look at their situation, if you saw them as maybe as two white people, the gendered part might still be there, but you'd be like, she out earns him. She pays for their omakase. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, he's lucky. He's being kept by a woman who works in banking, but that doesn't come into play because of the race side of it.
And it's quite interesting. The author does bring that up specifically. So she says, so were her parents being welcoming out of relief that their daughter wouldn't become a spinster, or out of surprise that she, as her friends pointed out, had got lucky? And whether it was 50-50 or 20-80, and then their father goes and buys some whiskey for them, and he can use chopsticks. Hooray! And they applauded that. It just maybe they had little experience of being around sort of white American people, perhaps, and assumed that they didn't know much about their culture and couldn't use chopsticks.
They were very proud of him for knowing how to do that, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And in a weird way, in that moment, the narrator was a little annoyed at her parents for gawking at him, like, oh my God, he's like, wasn't a monkey at a circus? Like somebody like, oh, he can use chopsticks. And it's like, whatever, it's 2018, guys. Like, this is, we live in New York. Please. Aspect of it as well.
I also liked this sort of like internal monologue she was having with herself throughout most of the story, where one of the quotes that I loved was, for a moment, the woman felt a kinship with the chef, but the moment passed. And then she goes on to say she didn't want to be one of these women who noted every teeny thing and racialized it. So she's struggling to decide, like, does she want to continue to sort of, even just if it's mentally and emotionally, like align herself with the other Asian people that she's meeting in her life and kind of be in that cultural aspect all the time, being aware of whether or not like people are paying attention to the fact that she's dating a white man. But then at the same time, she's like, but maybe I should be thinking about this so much. Like, am I part of the problem because I keep making notes? Like, and I would imagine, again, I can't be inside her head, and I am a white woman living in New York City. So I thought it was really interesting to experience that conflict, because I could tell, like, she wanted to be open to new people and new experiences. She didn't want her awareness of all of these little details that could be read as racial to limit her. But at the same time, she she can't help herself, and she also wants to like obviously protect her family and protect who she is. So I thought that was an interesting tension that was created throughout the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and right at the end when they walk out of the restaurant, he says to her, you take everything so personally, and you think, but then he's not understanding what it's like for her, in what for her feels like a foreign culture. I think we talked about this on the podcast before about how people who are outside of their culture feel and not a part of either, and so he's just not getting that at all. It just straight over his head.
So did you guys find that moment where he pats her head and tells her she overthinks things? Was it patronizing or was it good advice? A mix?
Only a bit patronizing.
Oh, well, this one was tough because I feel like I have been told, not by my husband, not so much in romantic relationships, but by members of my family, by friends, that I take things very personally. And I hate that. I hate when people say that because it feels like such an affront to my personality and my very being, and the fact that it matters to me the way that my reactions and my dynamics with people play out. Like if I don't take things personally, then who am I? That's sort of how I am. And so I felt for her in that moment, just knowing how painful that can be to hear. But again, I don't think he meant it to be mean or hateful. I think he probably thought that he was protecting her, which, then we sort of creep into the patronizing territory a little bit. But I do think that he wanted her to not be so aware of everything around her all the time. Like he wanted her to be able to separate herself from certain external situations. And again, because he doesn't understand what it's like to be experiencing a foreign culture, there's no way that he could have understood how patronizing that would feel to her, because she can't separate herself from all of these situations. It's who she is, to be able to sort of negotiate this culture and negotiate people around her reacting to her. And it felt very complicated and very loaded the way he said it. But again, I don't think that it was him criticizing her. I think he just kind of creeped into that patronizing territory a little bit without realizing it.
Yeah, and I think also he's probably a little bit socially awkward too, because there was I was just looking for it now. There's something where where the author says that because he works on his own in the pottery, that he doesn't see many people, and when he does go out, he likes to talk to everyone. So it's almost as if maybe he's not socialized enough with people to know what the boundaries are and what accepted practice is. So he just says the things and does the things that come into his head, not aware of what the other person is thinking.
It could be because he's under socialized, or it could just be because he doesn't have to worry about any of this ever. It could just be that, like, for him to say, "Oh, don't overanalyze everything. Everything's fine. Go with the flow." That is absolutely true for his reality in his body with the way he looks, right? Like, of course he thinks that way. That has always worked out for him in his life. And it's one of those things, I was actually having a discussion with someone recently where we were talking about a situation that, I was trying to like figure out a solution to this thing that was challenging. And they're like, well, this is how I've always overcome it. And I was like, yeah, but this is a gender one. I'm like, but what you don't understand is it's completely different for me because my gender. And then all of a sudden, this person took a step back. It wasn't my boyfriend, it was someone else. Took a step back, and we were like, that sounds true, actually. And I was like, yeah, thank you for acknowledging that it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this idea of taking things personally or not is very gendered. That's been my experience. Again, not to generalize, but I find that a lot of the men in my life find that they don't take things personally, or that they don't need to, that they can sort of react from what they see as a very non-emotional, rational, and I put that in quotes, kind of place. And they see the women around them taking everything personally, taking all of those personal feelings into account as they're interacting, reacting, all of those things. And so I think that in itself, even if you take the racial and cultural narrative out of it, I think that's a gendered conversation as well, and a very gender focused argument.
Yeah. And we keep trying to separate the racial and the gender and saying, oh, there's this gendered part of it, there's this racial part of it, and then there's also the intersection, right? Like, and also being Chinese woman specifically, aside from being a woman or being Chinese, has its own baggage as well. Like part of the why she's lucky is the expectation of the kind of family that she's supposed to have, or the goals that she's supposed to have on her personal life, on top of her professional life. It's supposed to be both, right? Like, it's supposed to be like, you're supposed to be a banker and, right?
Yeah, because you also have some kids now. You're 36.
Tick tick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and she had her own sort of psychological traits too. So she was highly organized, and there's a great line about spreadsheets somewhere where she was. Where is it? I don't know where it is.
So she was cataloging all her possessions.
Yeah. She was one of those people who kind to create an Excel spreadsheet of everything she owned and send it to him. And he was one of those people who kind to look at an Excel spreadsheet and squint. So I thought that was a great line, because, and her looking up when was the best time to arrive in New York for the traffic and things like that. So she was highly organized. So you can see that this is how she works, and this is how she deals with life. She strategizes everything and organizes everything. So she's second guessing everything that's happening and everything that he's saying. So it's one of these things, isn't it? The question I asked in the summary, it's sort of a bit of both, a bit of both, a bit of neither, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. I think that the complexity of it is why the story is rich despite being short. Because you're not 100% sure on, there's no clear right or wrong here. There's no clear, she overreacts, she didn't overreact, he's patronizing, he's not patronizing. Because one of the questions that I have is, if he were also Asian, would we then see what he said differently? Right? Like, now does it change at all? The fact that he's like, don't take everything so personally. If it's coming now from an Asian man, does it change the subtext or what's actually being said?
Yeah, it would have been fascinating to learn more. And again, the story was short, but it would have been fascinating to learn more about the kind of family and the kind of place that he comes from, because we didn't get much of that. You have to wonder what kinds of conversations he had with his parents growing up about race and other cultures, and how aware or unaware his family is of issues of race and gender, because people are a product of their environment, and he's found himself living in cities. He's in New York, and I'm sure he's picked up some new kinds of awarenesses because of that. But at the end of the day, you also are kind of bound to where you come from. So I couldn't help but wonder if he came from this family that was kind of jokey about race, and maybe just like so friendly and so bubbly all the time that they didn't have time to really think about how their words and actions affect other people. I picture his dad probably being the kind of guy that like yells across a restaurant to talk to a waitress or a server, and he probably would have done that no matter where he was and no matter what the circumstances were. So again, we don't get that because the story is short, but I have to believe that to some extent he's a product of his environment, because if you live in New York, you, at least in my experience, you do absorb some of that progressive, more educated nature. And so I like to kind of imagine that a lot of his missteps are rooted in maybe like a different kind of place that he came from.
And to be fair, the missteps are like advanced level racial education. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're not these glaring like faux pas. He's not like blum. You know what I'm saying? Like, it is that more subtle, like advanced level, you've really been thinking about this sort of slips.
Right, which goes back to that moment where she's like, I don't want to be the kind of person that looks at every last detail and makes it about race. So they kind of they're in these two very unique positions with it, because he, I think, has no idea what he's doing.
No, and I think it's interesting when he's talking to the chef, and he's making the faux pas about, I'm sure I've seen you here before. So we have the, you all look similar type thing going on, and we're all starting to cringe as we're reading it. But then he's leaning over, and the guy says, I was fired. And our main character, he won't let it go. Why were you fired? Why were you fired? He wants to find out. He doesn't sort of sit back and think, oh, maybe I shouldn't ask it. So he's obviously he's obviously, I think he's one of these people who just says things. He's got no sort of compass that tells him that the person on the receiving end of this might take offense or might not like what I'm doing. So I think that I'm hoping that was a very clever thing to show that he just asks, "Well, why'd you get fired? Why'd you get fired?" You know, he wants that. He sees no reason why he can't be told the answer. So maybe that's a little bit sort of Asperger's or something going along there. So because they've got no sort of internal feedback, it just comes straight out, and they don't have any. They have difficulty in understanding how what they say is perceived by the other side.
It's funny because you say maybe it's a little Asperger's, and I'm like, I think he just feels entitled to an answer, and the idea that those two things might sometimes resemble each other is kind of funny. Because I think he just, and she also made that comment where he wasn't necessarily insisting that he had seen him before because he thinks all Asian people look the same. It may not be that. It may just be he wants to be right. And when you want to be right, then you kind of force the conversation to move in a certain direction to not ever have to say you were wrong.
He has like an almost aggressive confidence.
Yes.
And I don't think it ever occurs to him that anybody else would ever be offended by what he has to say, or B, that you could ever be too confident or be too friendly. I don't think that's on his radar at all, that other people have different kinds of social boundaries. There's just no filter, but I think it's rooted in this extroversion and this confidence, which she mentions was one of the things that attracted her to him. Like, she loved that he was a natural extrovert, which was so different than the way that she was. And that really drew her to him. And as somebody, I've always been attracted to very confident people. And so I really felt for her in that. And it also it sort of tempered my feelings toward him too, because that was one of his strong points in a lot of situations. Being confident 90% of the time is a really great quality, but that other 10%, you can really offend people without realizing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's quite interesting that she, I don't know whether she felt that he was doing a sort of cultural appropriation thing or not, but when they were talking about the places that the chef had worked and they'd worked, and she felt that she needed to say, there was also that place in Boston. Remember the one I took you to the first time you had Omakase? So it's almost as if she's sort of saying, no, this is me. This is my culture. Let me have some of this.
I don't think it's cultural appropriation.
No?
The reason I'm grinning so much is because, again, it's creepy how much I see of my parents, 2 Cubans. So like some of this stuff is just like couples, because, and my mom would love for me to shout this out because this is like one of her things that she like repeats all the time, is like she'll discover like some really good album or some really good musician, or like she started getting my parents to go to the Met to see opera, like to do like different things. And then my dad would walk around like as if it was his idea and he discovered the musician. And she's just like, no, it like bothers her so much.
Oh my gosh.
She'll tell him, she'll always just say like, nope, that was me. Like straight up. But yeah. So it's just like, I don't know if it's cultural appropriation. I think it's just overconfident men. Like, again, like this guy runs. So it's like, of course he was the one who discovered it. It doesn't even occur to them that they did it. They're not even lying as they say it. They've convinced themselves of this.
Well, and there was even a moment where, if I remember correctly, he was asking the chef where else he had worked, and he kept being like, "Oh no, like I know all the places. Like I just tell me, like try me, test me." And it's like, first of all, there's hundreds and hundreds of sushi restaurants in New York, so sit down, sir. You may not have gone to all of them. And it was just, he so wanted to win. It was very important to him to level with the chef and be like, "I get you." And that, I wonder too, is like maybe he's almost trying to like overcompensate by trying to like prove how much he knows about sushi and thereby prove how much he knows about Asian culture, which obviously that's not the same thing. It's almost like he's just like trying so hard to level with him that it really is the opposite effect in the end.
Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, this guy reminds me so much of my dad, which again might be why I'm like, he's not a bad guy. Because at the end of the day, my dad's been married to the same woman for decades. Very involved father. Like, this is still good people who just have what you said earlier, that sort of aggressive confidence that is high risk, high reward, because my dad's definitely like stepped in it while also being endearing and sociable and fun. So, both happens. Yeah.
And I love the first sort of date they had was they watched House of Flying Daggers, and he had no idea that this might not be appropriate or might be misunderstood or something. He just what it's
And to be fair, it's not that it's
Yeah.
not appropriate. It's absolutely fine to watch that movie with your Asian girlfriend. It's just as a first date, he didn't have the forethought of, there's a lot of women who, when they date online, are worried about guys who, you know what I'm saying? He didn't have that. He didn't have that moment of like, there's some baggage here that she might have for very valid reasons that I can preemptively acknowledge and mitigate, right? Like he doesn't have that moment because once you've already dated as a sixth date or even a third or whatever, it's fine, right? Like you've already gotten past that. This isn't about that. I like you for you. I don't like you because you're Chinese, right?
It's great. I loved later on when she asked him and he said, "Well, it came up on my browser and it's critically acclaimed, so I thought we'd watch it." It just no idea. No.
I think he might just be kind of dumb. Oh, I think he just might not be that smart.
Yeah, I think.
No, maybe. I think he just doesn't have to think about it. That's what it ultimately comes down to. He just doesn't have to ever think about these things, and he doesn't want to do the work to think about it. Like, he doesn't see why.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is sort of how it should be in a way. There should be no sort of question of race or doing things because someone is from a certain country or a certain color or something. It's people should be people, and in a way that's perfect. That he doesn't see her race or her parents' race as being important.
Yes and no. It's a little bit like, I get what you're saying, where it's good that he doesn't see her race as being important and he is seeing a person, he is deciding whether or not he wants to be with that person. That part's great. But also we live in a world where all of these things that she's internalized are also real. So it'd be great if he at least knew about them to be a better partner to somebody who has to grapple with this, right? Like,
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that I hear a lot in different kinds of pop culture and just with people in life. It's this idea of saying things like, well, I don't see color. And people who experience race and culture personally on a daily basis say, I actually would really like for you to, like, not in an inappropriate way, but you pretending that you're not acknowledging my background and where I came from and some of the unique challenges that I have to face is kind of rude and just completely ignorant to my experience. And so I think both sides of that argument probably can really explain themselves in a way that makes sense. Like both sides of that argument are fair to a certain group of people. So I think it sort of goes back to that question of like, is it okay to not see color, to not see race? And this guy, I think, seems to think, yeah, like we don't need to talk about it. Like, sure, I like this movie. Let's watch it. So I think it, in my opinion, it kind of goes back to that conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think he'd be willing to learn. Like, but he just, you kind of got, like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I don't think he's a bad guy. He just doesn't have to think about these things.
But then he doesn't try to understand, and he says that she's overthinking things with the pat on the head as well. So
yeah, but I mean, I feel like the moment to have that conversation isn't at the sushi restaurant where he's like trying to prove how much he knows about sushi. Like that's like at home. It's kind of, I don't think terrible, but like timing is so important for so many things, right? So I feel like it's one of those, like, she's gonna have to, if she wanted to, if she thought it was worth it, she thought the relationship was worth it, to do the work of educating him so that he could be a better partner to her moving forward. But one thing I'm realizing is we've been digging in deep about all of these like thorny, complicated racial issues. And it sort of goes back to the strength of the story because it's so short and it's such a short span of time, and doing the difficult thing of moving between memories and a plot that's happening in real, like now and then, the back and forth, which is harder than it looks. She puts all this stuff in there, right? She has the friends' opinions, the family opinion, also the narrator's thoughts about the waitress who is the pierced, pretty Asian girl who she's like, a lot of people had to suffer so you could pierce your lip, remember? Like, there's all of these complicated things that are in there, which to me, it's just like the strength of the story. Like that's why I really like this story, is just how smart and sharp it is.
It is. It is quite. I mean, it's over 6,500 words, so it's for the short stories that we feature on this podcast, it's more of a lengthy one than a lot that we've read, but it's very skillfully written. It's very openly written. There's no author intrusion or anything like that. You just read it and you're so into the characters and so into the sort of the tension between them, or her feeling that there's tension between them.
And the
And
man doesn't realize until the very end.
yeah,
Tension.
and even then, it's her problem. It's it's
That's the kind of stuff that definitely gets people into couples therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that these two are gonna last. I agree with you. I think that he could learn. I think if they don't last, I don't know that it's his ignorance to her culture that's going to like be the thing that does them in. But I think that she could probably find somebody who understands her in a lot of ways better than he does. And a conversation like this, though, does start to reveal some of those cracks that maybe she would be able to tolerate for much longer.
Yeah.
And maybe she'll find someone who's a bit more financially viable than a guy who never pays the bills.
Yeah. Well, and now she's in New York. She's out of Boston, so she has a much bigger pool to work with, and hopefully she'll find somebody that understands her better.
Yeah. Also, there's that point where she's like that she tips her usual 20% that very smartly was woven in after, because Chinese people, the stereotype is that they're cheap. So there's this sense in how even like, you know what I'm saying? Like the things, because there's a lot of short stories that we'll read that will talk about, they went out to dinner, whatever, they paid the bill, they left. But just that moment of like, by the way, please note that she tipped 20%. Like because it's third person, but it's third person close to her. So it's sort of like what's important in the narration is what's important to her. And what's important to her is there's this 20% tip, bucking that stereotype, right?
Yeah.
And when he said, when they're leaving, he said, "Sweetheart, I think you've had enough to drink." Then he turned to the chef, "Time to go, methinks." He just, cringe. You're just so patronizing.
Aggressive confidence,
Yeah, aggressive confidence, absolutely.
Aggressive confidence. Okay, I'll remember that then.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to add? Are we ready for game time?
The one other detail that I just wanted to point out, because I loved it, and it doesn't necessarily fit into any of the other lines of discussion that we've covered already, but I loved in the first two paragraphs how she was talking about the New York subway and just the way that she compared the New York public transportation system to the Boston public transportation system. And she says something to the effect that the Boston subway or the Boston metro can get you anywhere, but it's a lovely experience. So it's not really useful, but like it feels great to be on it. And then moving to New York, she's like, you can go anywhere on the New York City subway, but you have to endure a lot in order to use it. And immediately I was like, take it into the story, because I just thought that was such a sharp observation. And I've lived in New York for 6-7 years, and I've never thought about it like that, but that really captures it. Like, and that's sort of, therein lies so many of the challenges about living in a city like New York. You know, you have access to so many things, but you have to endure a lot. And so I thought her perspective on that was very interesting. And also just a testament to the great writing.
Yeah, I love that. I'm glad you brought that detail up. I'd forgotten over the course of the discussion. But so as someone who takes the New York City subway every single day as part of my commute, I was both triggered and like validated. As somebody who complains all the time about my commute, like on the one hand, I have to acknowledge it's a miracle that it's like 2 million people commute in and out of New York every day for work, and that it's functional and you can kind of get anywhere within a reasonable amount of time. That is a miracle. But my God, in order to get that off the ground, it is the stuff that you have to endure. Oh my goodness. So I was just like, I was so triggered.
Yeah, I felt understood and triggered.
Yes, I was like,
We have the same thing in London too. That if you want that mass transportation system that just works, you do have to suffer a lot of other pleasant stuff.
And it's funny how vulnerable it is, because the blizzard just before Thanksgiving, Allie knows, everything just shut down. And I'm trying to get back to Jersey, because I commute from Jersey just like right on the Hudson in and out to Manhattan. And normally my commute an hour took me 4 hours. Just how fragile things become, just from a little bit of snow that was unexpected.
Yep, your life is hanging in the balance with the subway.
Yeah, I there was a point where I'm like, I think I just need to get a hotel tonight because there's no way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that was sort of how her experience with New York started. In addition to her like timing her move based on traffic, I really liked the way that she sort of took in the city around her and what that said about her as a character.
Yeah, and the acknowledgement that there's a lot to endure is something that I think people don't write that much about when they write about New York. They'll talk about like inequality, or they'll talk about how it's full of energy or it's fast paced or things like that, but never like just like, even if you're not suffering from the terrible inequality, even if you're making it, you're still enduring a lot. That was great.
And I like the fact that the author had her coming from Boston, not some sort of little quiet backwater somewhere. So there's big culture shock. There's a culture shock, but she's moving from one big city to another, but totally different big city. So that was quite nice to draw out those differences.
Yeah, I mean, New Yorkers would sneer at the idea that Boston's a big city, but it's true.
Yes, technically it is true.
Yeah,
sorry.
Very technically. Yeah. What's that joke? How does it go? That whenever New Yorkers compare themselves to Boston, they'll brag about everything in New York being better and then be like, even our rats are bigger.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So, anything else that we've missed or need to cover?
Don't think so.
I don't think so.
No.
Okay. So, we always do this rating system that's very dumb because from 1 to 6. But it's also very unique to us from episode 1. So, on a rating, on a scale of 1 to 6, just to get like our senses, I think we're all fairly high.
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, my rating's gone up, but I'm Kenichiing myself. But I think because of the skillful way that the author creates the characters and shows the characters to us through her writing, I'm going to give it a 5.5.
Okay, nice. We do half points because we pretty soon we're gonna start doing quarter points. So what he said, it's Kenichi himself. It's first episode we had an old host named Kenichi, who he was like, we shouldn't do ratings because if we do ratings, we're just gonna constantly be thinking, but if I gave this a 6, is this a 6? Is this a 4? And his prophecy has become true.
Well, I have the luxury of coming in and not having to practice that sort of relative ranking. I'm going to give it a 6. I really enjoyed the reading experience. As I said, it's really like turned me on again to short stories. And I think the writing was so artful and really packed such a punch. And I felt very attached to both characters in different ways. But I felt very invested in where their conversation was going. And I was just very impressed by the way that the story played out. And it was generally like a lovely reading experience. So I'm going to give it a 6.
Right. Yeah. I'm sort of torn between. I think I have to give it a 5.5 just because the more we talked about all the racial stuff, the more I was like, yeah, this was very like well crafted. It had more depth than I realized on my first read through. Yeah. The only reason I can't give it a 6 is because I've Kenichi'd myself. So doesn't compare to my other 6s where I was like literally screaming from the rooftop.
This like sword of Damocles over our head, isn't it? Kenichi.
Yeah, it's like, oh, he was right. This is the worst
you're
thing we've
do
ever
a 6.
done.
You have to think about it.
But we've committed to it. Yeah, because every time it's been a 6, it's been I'm spamming people on Messenger to read the story right now. So I didn't get that with this.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we going to read next week? What do we want to read next week?
Yeah, what are we going to read next week? Ali, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I submitted Us and Them by David Sedaris.
Oh.
Okay, I'm trying to find my note. I just realized it. And I'm submitting. Who read those? This is Earl Sent by Robert Olin Butler.
Okay, so we have a quiz, no surprise, about Japanese food. So if you're of the type to do that, you might have been able to guess that and find a quiz, but never mind. And it's complicated because both of your first names begin with A, so I've had to write them out. Well, because normally it's A or G or R or something like that. Yeah. You see? Mate. Anyway, so where are we? Right. So Ali, being the guest, and she's first on my screen, I'm going to read you a question and give you 4 options, and you have to tell me which of the options is true.
Okay.
So, number 1, what is onigiri? Onigiri. Onigiri. Is it rice formed into a ball wrapped in seaweed? Is it tiny sliced raw meat or fish? Is it breaded and fried pork cutlets? Or is it grilled meat?
As a huge fan of Asian food, I feel very nervous because I don't know the answer to this question offhand. 2 of the dishes you mentioned don't sound familiar to me, so I'm going to go with B.
Thinly sliced raw meat or fish?
Oh, no, that's
B.
sashimi.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with A.
Rice formed into a ball wrapped in seaweed?
Yes.
You'd be right. That is correct.
Wow.
Fair.
Well, I'm glad I didn't do B because that's sashimi. So okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. Anise, what 3 ingredients are used to make dashi? Is it water, kombu, and bonito flakes? Is it water, soy sauce, and bonito flakes? Is it water, miso, and kombu? Or is it water, soy sauce, and miso?
B?
No, it's A again. Water, kombu, and bonito flakes to make a simple broth. Okay. Ali, what is mochi or mochi? I think it's mochi. Are they pancakes made with red bean, a sweet paste made from adzuki beans? Is it a confection made from glutinous rice, or is it caramelized bread?
C.
C is correct. You see. Very good. Anais, what are soba noodles made out of? SOBA. Is it agar, wheat, potato starch, or buckwheat flour?
Buckwheat flour.
Buckwheat flour is correct. Very good. Ali, yuzu is a type of what? Fish, noodle, soup, or citrus?
D. Citrus.
Is correct. Aromatic fruit that looks like a grapefruit. She's acing this old quiz.
We're going to be reading.
Yeah. Anais, what is miso made out of? Is it red beans, fermented soybeans, seaweed, or fermented mushroom?
I think it's fermented soybeans.
You think correctly. You're making it into a race.
You're still ahead.
Yes, well, just by 1. Ali, what is yakitori? Is it a fried noodle dish, grilled seafood, skewered chicken, or raw egg cooked over hot rice? Yakitori.
Would you mind saying the options again?
Yeah. Okay. A fried noodle dish, grilled seafood, skewered chicken, or raw egg cooked over hot rice?
I'm going to go with B.
Grilled seafood. You would be incorrect.
Oh,
it's
no.
skewered chicken.
Oh, I know.
Oh,
now it is a race.
Yeah. So, Anise, what is unagi? Is it thick soy sauce, freshwater eel, fermented rice, or grilled pork?
Eel?
Eel is correct. 3 all. Just 1 round to go. And
oh my goodness. It's down to the wire.
I don't have a tiebreaker, so I'm going to have to...
What?
Oh, we'll see.
We don't have a tiebreaker. Guest gets it. The guest gets it because I can keep resubmitting every week.
Yeah, so that's fair enough. Okay, Ali, what is tamagoyaki? Tamagoyaki. Is it a layered egg omelette? Is it rice cooked with adzuki beans? Is it cooking wine? Or is it dried and smoked tuna?
I'm going to go with B.
Rice cooked with adzuki beans, you'd be incorrect.
It's a
layered egg omelette. Yeah. You have it in the bento boxes. So, Anais, to take it.
Oh my God, or tie.
Yuba, Y-U-B-A, is another name for what? Seaweed, grilled fish, tofu skin, or rice wine? Yuba, Y-U-B-A.
Rice wine?
No. It's tofu skin.
Hmm.
So it's a draw.
It's a
and
draw.
The guest gets it.
Okay, so Allie, what are we reading next week?
Us and Them by David Sedaris.
Okay, but before you go, share your overthinking analysis of this story at our Facebook group, the Literary Roadhouse Readers, or on Twitter at LitRoadhouse, or our website, literaryroadhouse.com. But Facebook's the place to be. People are actually chatting. Okay, want more Omakase-like surprise, but for books? Join the Literary Roadhouse Book Club, where we discuss a novel each month. In February, we're reading Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. Lastly, it is self-evident that we must try some omakase in Harlem to fully understand this story. Support our sushi and podcast expenses at patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the rogue master sushi chef in your life. Until next time, read a good story.